Yehen Opka rewritten or expanded data high. Original C2 guna, grammar corrected, or proper English main. The history of New York City, from a small outpost to the world's greatest city. Introduction. New York City is home to approximately 8.3 million inhabitants, 32,000 streets, and 5 boroughs, all of which together form one of the most remarkable cities on the planet. What makes this city truly extraordinary is the realization that virtually everything which defines New York today, its iconic skyline, its world-famous cultural offerings, and the relentless energy of its streets, simply did not exist even a century ago. The city's entire identity has been shaped by centuries of constant evolution, development, and renewal, transforming it beyond recognition. But how did a small European trading outpost, established just over 400 years ago, grow into the sprawling megacity that stands before us today? This is the remarkable story of how New York became the world's greatest city. The native inhabitants and the natural landscape. Long before the construction of towering skyscrapers or the noise of bustling streets, the land that would one day become New York City was a place of extraordinary natural beauty. Dense forests covered the terrain, rivers flowed freely through the landscape, and abundant wildlife roamed across the region. The land was home to various groups of Algonquian-speaking Native American tribes, the most prominent of which were the Lenape people. For approximately 8,000 years, the Lenape lived in complete harmony with their natural surroundings. They hunted game, fished the rivers, and cultivated the land in a sustainable and undisturbed manner, long before the first European explorer ever set foot on these shores. Their way of life was peaceful, deeply connected to nature, and largely self-sufficient. They had established trade networks, social structures, and spiritual practices that had endured for thousands of years. All of this, however, would change dramatically with the arrival of Europeans in the 16th century. Early European exploration. The European exploration and colonization of the Americas began in earnest at the start of the 16th century. Ambitious navigators and explorers from nations such as Spain, France, and the Netherlands set out across the Atlantic Ocean in search of new trade routes and resource-rich territories in the newly discovered continents. In 1524, the Italian explorer Giovanni de Verrazzano, sailing under the French flag, became the first European to lay eyes upon the shores of what would one day become New York Harbor. He claimed the area in the name of France, though no serious attempt was made to establish a permanent colonial settlement there at the time. It would be nearly another 100 years before Europeans returned to this region in any meaningful way. When they did return, it was the Dutch who would ultimately leave the most lasting and significant impression on the area that would one day become New York City. Henry Hudson and the Dutch claim. In 1609, the English explorer Henry Hudson, working in the employ of the Dutch East India Company, was dispatched on an expedition with the primary objective of discovering the elusive Northwest Passage, a legendary sea route believed to connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Although Hudson never found this passage, his voyage proved to be of enormous historical importance. During his journey, he sailed up the Great Northern River of New York Harbor, which today bears his name in honor of his exploration. He claimed the fertile land on either side of the river on behalf of the Dutch Republic, thereby establishing a strong and legitimate foothold for future Dutch settlement and commercial activity in the region. The decades that followed saw the Dutch establish a series of trading posts along the banks of the Hudson River, as well as at various other strategic points along the coastline stretching from the Delaware River all the way to Cape Cod. This expansive territorial claim formed the foundation of the Dutch colony known as New Netherland. In the early days, the settlers who occupied these isolated outposts were primarily focused on the highly profitable fur trade, exchanging goods with local Native Americans for beaver pelts and other valuable furs that were in great demand back in Europe. The founding of New Amsterdam. In 1624, the Dutch West India Company made a decisive move by sending a ship filled with colonists to establish permanent civilian settlements throughout the region of New Netherland. The settlers first landed on what is now known as Governor's Island, before being dispersed to various pre-selected sites across the colony. A small but strategically important group was disembarked at the southern tip of Manhattan Island. The decision to settle here was driven by a clear strategic purpose. A fortification was to be constructed at this location to protect the vital entrance to the Hudson River and to safeguard the valuable cargo of the fur trade that passed through it regularly. Construction of Fort Amsterdam began in 1625, and the fortification quickly became the central hub around which an entirely new settlement rapidly took shape. This settlement was named New Amsterdam, and with its founding, the earliest foundations of what would eventually become New York City were firmly established. In 1626, in an effort to legitimize the Dutch claim to the land, the Director General of New Netherland, Peter Minuit, negotiated the purchase of the island of Manhattan from a band of local Lenape Indians. In exchange for the entire island, Minuit offered traded goods valued at approximately 60 guilders, equivalent to roughly $1,000 in today's currency. It was one of the most consequential real estate transactions in human history. Under Minuit and his successor Peter Stuyvesant, the colony grew steadily, and by 1655, its population had reached approximately 1,500 people. However, Stuyvesant was deeply unpopular among the colonists due to his strict and authoritarian policies. He imposed tight regulations on the sale of alcohol, attempted to exert control over the Dutch Reformed Church, and actively blocked other religious groups, including Quakers, Jews, and Lutherans, from establishing places of worship within the colony. Although the Dutch West India Company attempted to intervene by introducing more lenient and tolerant policies, these reforms were ultimately cut short by the outbreak of war. The English takeover and the birth of New York. During the latter half of the 17th century, the Netherlands and England were locked in an intense and bitter rivalry for supremacy over global maritime trade and commerce. Between 1652 and 1673, a series of three major conflicts, collectively known as the Anglo-Dutch Wars, saw Dutch and English naval fleets engage in fierce battles across the world's oceans. It was against this tense backdrop that, in 1653, the inhabitants of New Amsterdam constructed a large defensive wall along the northern boundary of their settlement, on what is today known as Wall Street, in order to protect the city from potential overland attacks by English forces advancing from the colony of New England to the north. Despite these defensive preparations, the English sent a small but powerful naval fleet to the region in 1664, with orders to seize the entire colony of New Netherland and its capital, New Amsterdam. Stuyvesant, unable to organize any meaningful resistance, was forced to surrender the city without a single shot being fired. The English wasted no time in renaming the colony. Fort Amsterdam was renamed Fort James, and both the colony of New Netherland and the city of New Amsterdam were rebranded as New York, a name chosen in honor of James, the Duke of York, who would later ascend to the throne as King James II of England. New York briefly reverted to Dutch control in 1673 during the Third Anglo-Dutch War, but was permanently returned to English possession under the terms of the Treaty of Westminster in 1674, which brought an end to the prolonged hostilities between the two nations. Growth under English rule. Under English rule, New York continued to grow and prosper at a steady pace, driven by a thriving economy and a continuous influx of immigrants arriving from across Europe. While the city adopted many of the customs and institutions of its new English rulers, it also retained several practices that had been introduced during the Dutch era, among them, the deeply troubling institution of slavery. Slavery had become thoroughly embedded in New York's economy through the active transportation of enslaved people through its port. By the 1740s, approximately 20% of New York's total population consisted of enslaved Africans, numbering around 2,500 individuals, a stark and sobering reminder of the city's darker historical chapters. As the 18th century progressed, New York emerged as an increasingly important center of political activism and cultural change. In the years leading up to the American Revolution, the city became a major hub for organized dissent. The Sons of Liberty, a secret and influential political organization, became particularly active in New York, targeting the significant portion of the city's population who remained loyal to the British Crown. In 1765, the historic Stamp Act Congress was convened in New York City, bringing together representatives from 13 American colonies to formally unite in opposition to the Stamp Act imposed by the British Parliament. The grievances and principles articulated at this Congress laid an important ideological foundation for the revolution that was soon to follow, and for the Declaration of Independence that would ultimately give birth to a new nation. The American Revolution. When the American War of Independence broke out in 1775, New York City found itself at the very center of the conflict. The city was initially held by the forces of the Continental Army under General George Washington, but this situation changed dramatically in August 1776 at the Battle of Long Island. In what proved to be a decisive and crushing defeat for the American forces, Washington's army was outmaneuvered and overwhelmed by a superior British force. The British subsequently occupied New York City and used it as their primary strategic base of operations for the remainder of the war, a period of occupation that would last nearly 7 years. By 1783, the war had finally come to an end with the signing of the Treaty of Paris. British forces began their withdrawal from the city, and New York emerged from the long years of occupation as a proud symbol of liberty and independence in the newly formed American nation. In January 1785, the city was honored with the designation of national capital, and it played host to several of the most defining moments in early American history. In April 1789, George Washington was inaugurated as the first president of the United States at Federal Hall. The first Congress of the United States was also formed in the same building, and the landmark Bill of Rights was drafted there as well, all on present-day Wall Street. The economic and commercial rise of the 19th century. As the 19th century dawned, New York had already firmly established itself as a global center of finance and banking. Wall Street and Lower Manhattan were home to the Bank of New York, founded by Alexander Hamilton in 1784, as well as the New York Stock Exchange, which had been established in 1792. The city's position as the nation's leading commercial hub was further cemented in 1825 with the completion of the Erie Canal, an extraordinary feat of engineering that connected the Great Lakes to the Hudson River, and by extension, to the Atlantic Ocean. The canal transformed New York into the most important and busiest port in the entire nation, surpassing both Boston and Philadelphia in terms of trade volume and commercial significance. As the city continued to expand, it attracted wave after wave of immigrants from across Europe and Asia, who came in search of opportunity, freedom, and a fresh start in life. The population exploded from approximately 60,000 in 1800 to well over 500,000 by the middle of the century. Newcomers fleeing poverty, religious persecution, and political upheaval poured into the city, transforming it into a vibrant and richly diverse melting pot of cultures, languages, and ethnicities. The abolition of slavery within the state of New York in 1827 added further to the city's population, as large numbers of freed African Americans made their way to the city in search of new opportunities and a better life. The Lower East Side in particular became the beating heart of immigrant life, with its crowded tenement buildings, bustling street markets, and teeming neighborhoods filled with new arrivals from Ireland, Italy, Eastern Europe, and China. However, this dramatic surge in population also brought with it a host of serious social problems. Severely overcrowded living conditions created ideal breeding grounds for deadly diseases such as cholera, which broke out on multiple occasions beginning in the 1830s. The densely packed tenement buildings also proved to be dangerously flammable, as demonstrated by the devastating Great Fire of New York in 1835, which destroyed approximately 50 acres of the city. Poverty-stricken neighborhoods, such as the Five Points and Hell's Kitchen, became notorious for violent crime, with infamous gangs like the Dead Rabbits and the Bowery Boys terrorizing the streets through robbery, petty theft, and organized violence. The Civil War and cultural expansion. The outbreak of the American Civil War in 1861 brought yet another period of turmoil to the city. Although New York State was firmly aligned with the Union cause, the city itself was deeply divided. Its strong commercial and financial ties to the cotton-producing South, combined with widespread resentment among its working-class immigrant population toward the military draft, created a volatile and dangerous social atmosphere. This tension exploded in July 1863 with the New York draft riots, one of the most violent and destructive episodes of civil unrest in American history. Fueled largely by anger over a provision that allowed wealthy men to pay a fee to avoid military service, the riots lasted for 5 brutal days and resulted in widespread destruction and loss of life throughout the city. In the aftermath of the war, New York entered a period of remarkable cultural flourishing. Central Park, which had opened to the public in 1858, provided a welcome green sanctuary for the city's residents, offering recreational space and relief from the pressures of urban life. The theaters of Broadway and the grand concert halls of Carnegie Hall became celebrated venues for world-class performances and productions, firmly establishing New York as the undisputed cultural capital of the nation. This era also saw the founding of several of the city's most treasured cultural institutions, including the American Museum of Natural History in 1869, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 1870, and the New York Public Library in 1895. The newspaper industry also flourished during this period, with publications such as the New York Times, the New York Herald, and the New York World rising to national prominence and shaping public opinion on a grand scale. Iconic landmarks and infrastructure. New York's relentless northward expansion up the island of Manhattan, combined with the growing need to connect the city to neighboring communities on Long Island and beyond, drove an ambitious program of infrastructure development during the latter decades of the 19th century. The Brooklyn Bridge, one of the greatest engineering achievements of its era, was completed in 1883 and provided a vital link between Manhattan and Brooklyn, transforming the movement of people and goods across the region. Then, in 1886, New York received what would become its most iconic and universally recognized symbol. The Statue of Liberty, a magnificent gift from the nation of France, was erected in the middle of New York Harbor. Standing as a towering beacon of hope and freedom, the statue welcomed the millions of immigrants who arrived on American shores in search of a better life. Many of these newcomers passed through the Immigration Processing Center, established on nearby Ellis Island in 1892, before making their way into the city to begin their new lives. The pace of development continued unabated into the 20th century. In 1904, New York's first subway system opened, connecting City Hall to Harlem and Brooklyn, and revolutionizing the way the city's residents moved through their metropolis. The Williamsburg Bridge opened in 1903, and the Manhattan Bridge in 1909, further improving connectivity across the waterways that divided the city. Most dramatically of all, the city's skyline began to transform in a spectacular fashion as architects and property developers competed fiercely to construct the tallest and most visually striking buildings in the world. By the early 1930s, the iconic silhouettes of the Woolworth Building, the Chrysler Building, and the Empire State Building had all been completed, proudly projecting New York's extraordinary economic ambition and architectural boldness to the entire world. Prohibition, the Roaring Twenties, and the Great Depression. The 1920s were a decade of extraordinary contradiction for New York City. While the federal government's prohibition laws officially banned the sale and consumption of alcohol across the United States, New York responded with characteristic defiance. Speakeasies and underground jazz clubs flourished in every corner of the city, operating openly and brazenly despite their illegal status. Bootleg liquor flowed freely, and illicit entertainment thrived on a massive scale. Estimates suggest that at the height of Prohibition, New York was home to anywhere between 30,000 and 100,000 illegal drinking establishments. a remarkable testament to the city's irrepressible spirit and its deep resistance to moral legislation. However, the exuberance of the Roaring Twenties came to a sudden and catastrophic end with the Wall Street crash of October 1929, which triggered the devastating Great Depression of the 1930s. Banks collapsed, businesses shuttered, and unemployment soared to staggering levels, leaving millions of ordinary New Yorkers without work and without hope. Central Park and other public spaces across the city became home to vast makeshift shanty towns, mockingly referred to as Hoovervilles, a sardonic reference to President Herbert Hoover, whom many blamed for the severity of the economic catastrophe. World War II and the post-war era. The city only truly began to recover with the outbreak of World War II in 1939. Although the United States did not formally enter the conflict until December 1941, New York City quickly mobilized for war. Factories across the city churned out tanks, aircraft, and naval vessels for the Allied cause, while the city's ports and docking facilities became essential lifelines for the transportation of vital supplies and war materials across the Atlantic Ocean. When America did enter the war, enormous ocean liners departed from New York's piers, carrying hundreds of thousands of soldiers, sailors, and airmen on their way to the battlefronts of Europe and the Pacific. The post-war years brought an era of unprecedented global prominence to New York City. While many of the world's greatest cities lay in ruins following the destruction of the war, New York emerged stronger and more influential than ever. In 1952, the city became the permanent home of the United Nations headquarters, cementing its status as the center of international diplomacy. New York also inherited Paris's former role as the global capital of the art world, and by the 1960s had established itself as a serious rival to London in the realm of international finance. Although the 1970s brought a period of significant decline, marked by soaring crime rates and widespread urban deprivation, the city responded with characteristic resilience. Major urban renewal projects and the redevelopment of older pre-war infrastructure led to the construction of bold new architectural projects, most notably the World Trade Center, which was completed in 1973 and briefly became the tallest building in the world. Conclusion. Since those transformative post-war decades, New York City has continued to face its share of challenges and setbacks. Yet what sets this extraordinary city apart from virtually every other great city in the world is its remarkable and seemingly limitless capacity to recover, reinvent, and rebuild itself time and time again. Throughout its 400-year history, New York has been shaped by an endless cycle of change, growth, and renewal, transforming itself from a modest Dutch colonial settlement into a global megacity unlike any other on Earth. The story of New York is, in many ways, the story of human ambition, resilience, and the enduring belief that no matter how difficult the circumstances, something even greater always lies ahead.